Yo te traigo esta bomba puertorriqueña. Yo te la traigo de Cupey, de Vega Baja y de Santurce, de toda parte de Puerto Rico. Esta bomba yo la dedico a toda mi gente de Puerto Rico, a la familia Fontanet, allá en Cupey Alto y Lo Mejía en Vega Baja. ¡Que gocen! ¡Sí!
Bomba, bomba, para siempre.
Bomba, bomba está presente, aquí lo canta mi gente.
Bomba, bomba, para siempre.
Baila, baila y goza, mi bomba puertorriqueña.
Bomba, bomba. Bomba, bomba. Bomba, bomba. Bomba, bomba. Bomba, bomba, para siempre.
Compass Publishing.
Seminar, the first one of the day. See, it looks like there's already a lot of people in here. Got some people, Karen from Mexico. Looks like Flora from Dominican Republic. We've got somebody from Morocco. Hi, Nadia. Ecuador as well. Dark Girl. Rachel from Bolivia. Indonesia's here too. Looks like we've got another person from Peru. Juan just coming in here. Wow, a lot of people from all around the world. Good to have everybody. Well, like I said, my name is Basil, and I am a linguist by trade, but I spend a lot of my time teaching English and teaching teachers how to teach English. So today I'd like to go over some of my thoughts on teaching. Let's get started. I have a question for all of you guys. We can take a look at the PowerPoint here. I want to talk a little bit about teaching challenges. And I guess my kind of open question is, to you all, what do you think is the most difficult subject for you to teach, and why? If any of you want to type in there into the chat, if there's a particular subject, whether it's listening or speaking, grammar, writing, whether it's something else, go ahead and share. If you have a science, oh, that's a tough one. It requires a lot of background knowledge too, not just writing. Writing is hard. Writing is really hard. There's a lot of feedback required, right? Conditionals, writing. Oh, well, good. I'm glad that I see some grammar, some writing in there. Today, actually, you know, the subject I find most difficult to teach actually is sort of similar to some of these, is grammar. It's my favorite subject to teach, but it's also, I think, the most challenging, just because it's hard to make it engaging. It's hard to make students, follow along. And so today I wanted to sort of talk about what I do to teach grammar and some curriculum that I think works really well for teaching grammar. And I'm going to start by explaining a little bit about my fundamentals. You'll have to bear with me. I have a terrible sense of humor, and you're going to see that all day today. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the importance of grammar and the challenges of teaching it. We're also going to talk a little bit about my approach to grammar through experiential language and through experiential learning. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Grammar Galaxy and Grammar Planet. These are two books that I think enable teachers to instruct grammar in a really effective way. I'm going to walk you through those. And then we're going to talk about ClassBox, which is an online service that supports teachers, and also about BigBox, which is an excellent support service for students as well. So let's get started. I have a couple of questions I'm going to keep throwing out at you all. First one is, what do you think these people have in common? Okay, we've got a firefighter, we've got a doctor, very handsome doctor actually. We've got a police officer. So what would you say? What do these different people have in common? Professions. I see professions. Jobs are professions. Yeah, definitely. And all of these professions, I think that all of these professions constitute heroes. I think that they're all heroes, not just professionals, but I also think that there's one hero that's missing, one hero that's really important that often gets overlooked. Can you think who that might be if we're talking about teaching grammar? Yeah, teachers. That's exactly right. It looks like Nikaria, sorry if I mispronounced that. You got the answer just right. Teachers. I think that sometimes learners feel that grammar is boring. But did you know that there are even situations where grammar can save lives? Now, stay with me for a moment. Let's take this as an example. The expression "let's eat grandma" and "let's eat grandma." Think about that for a second. In one situation, grandma's going to be pretty upset with what you're talking about. And in another situation, grandma's going to get ready for lunch, right? So this might be sort of an extreme example of grammar making a difference. And some people might say that this is punctuation, not grammar. But I, as a linguist, I have a more holistic view about grammar. I believe that, we know that intonation plays a part in grammar. Saying, "let's eat grandma," and "let's eat grandma," distinguishes an addressee, who you're talking to, from an object of a verb. And in this case, grandma does not want to be the object of a verb. So teaching this grammar, either whether it's speaking through intonation or whether it's a comma in writing, I think grammar class can help students understand why this is significant, and I think it can help them understand very clearly the importance of grammar. So my message today is to be a hero. That's what we're going to try and do. We're going to try and save lives through grammar. I want to pose another question to you all. What are some challenges in teaching grammar? What do you find difficult when you're trying to teach grammar? If you have any experience, it could be from writing too. Writing deals with a lot of the same situations. But if there are any challenges that you find in the classroom, verbs are hard. They're very complicated. It looks like Jasenia, excuse me on the pronunciation, she mentions verbs. Anything else that you find challenging about grammar? About the grammar classroom in particular, I think is the most difficult part. We have an example from these cactus or these cacti here, right? Gary says, Gary, you need to be less selfish. Remember, it's cactus. Actually, sweetie, the plural is cacti. Linguists find this really funny because it's a totally absurd plural rule. But I think that this is a great example of how sometimes explaining rules isn't useful because of all the exceptions. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about learning grammar, not just teaching grammar, but the difference between studying and learning as well. For me, it looks like Nadia says some functions are confusing because they mean the same thing. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and that's difficult. For me, some of the challenges that I face are large class sizes. It's difficult to make sure every student's following along. Linear approach to learning, just grammar points become something you check off and just move on, and I don't think that's very helpful for learning. Having multiple levels in a single class is always hard to manage. Multiple learning styles. Everyone takes in information differently. How to deal with errors. Some students don't react very positively to being told that they're wrong. It can hurt their confidence. Giving feedback, when and where and how. There's a lot of dispute about this. Explaining grammar rules. That can also be difficult depending on the level of the student. Even for linguists, explaining rules is hard. Activating quiet students, right? And we're going to talk a lot today. Well, quiet students, isn't that important for the speaking classroom? Well, I think that grammar needs to be taught through experience. So we're going to touch on that a little bit as well. And of course, focusing and motivating students. I think it's very hard in a lot of grammar classes, depending on how you teach it. So I want to talk about how we can make grammar learning, not grammar studying, and we'll touch on that later, but how to make grammar learning fun and meaningful, okay? When we're talking about large class sizes, some of the solutions that I have found most helpful are, you have plenty of students for participation. And what this means is, when you're doing a grammar activity, students need exposure, lots of exposure. And exposure they get doesn't have to always be from a native or primary source. It can be from other students. Getting students to participate and offer examples models it for other students. And having more students can be a benefit in a lot of ways. To avoid the linear approach, there's this style of teaching called the spiral approach, which I'm going to talk about. And this is where you take ideas that the students have already learned, and you come back around to it periodically, and you add complexity to it little by little as we go. And this is, I think, one of the hardest things to do because it requires a lot of planning. The curriculum we're going to look at a little bit today does a lot of this work for us. And so I think that curriculum selection, it can help a lot with making effective spiral learning experiences happen. If you have students with multiple levels, actually this is my favorite situation, mixed level classes. You have a bunch of teacher assistants in there now, right? You can get students to teach each other, help each other. And I think that teaching something makes you understand it a lot more than just studying it. And if you have mixed learning styles, well, it just means you have to vary how you're instructing and what kind of activities you're doing. You need variety. And certain curriculum lends itself to that better than others. Dealing with errors, I am not really into punitive feedback for making language mistakes. So I think that dealing with errors needs to be built into how you're teaching and what the curriculum is doing. Intuitive learning that has solid scaffolding and learning in context makes it so that the students can navigate the language problems, they can self-monitor, and they can correct each other as well. And I'm going to show you how scaffolding can really help a lot with that. There's actually a great video that Compass Publishing did. John Edwards did a video on scaffolding. So after this, if you want more information there, you can find it on their YouTube as well. Giving feedback. I don't like to lecture in grammar class. I like to teach through activities. And I think activities like games can automatically give feedback to students. You still need to be able to explain grammar rules though. And this is where simple charts, visual aids will help the students acquire the language and give the student and teachers sort of a mutual ground to communicate. I think to help quiet students, I actually think grammar class is what can help quiet students be more active in speaking classes because you can help set them up with the confidence they need to express themselves grammatically without having to stress about whether they're right or wrong. And that plays into motivation as well. Excuse me. I believe that it's not only providing, building confidence is not only motivating, but also structure and varying the methods and also incentivizing through instruction. I'm going to talk a lot about gamifying education because there's no reason why we shouldn't have fun when we're learning. So. This is sort of what I'm talking about when I was mentioning experiential learning. And so if you take a look here, just very briefly, you can see at the kind of top here, we have activities like reading and hearing, okay? And you can see that people generally remember about 10% of what they read, maybe 20% of what they hear, okay? And as you move down, you can see that it becomes more effective when you're seeing things versus remembering, okay, 50% of what they say, and see and hear, well, 50% still isn't good enough to be producing language, right? Or to be confident in knowing what you're talking about. If you look at the very bottom, students remember 90% of what they do. And this is, I think, the most important takeaway from what I call the experiential learning pyramid, which is doing something, doing the real thing and making genuine language happen. That's how you remember and that's how you master something like grammar. It's not about reading it in a book or hearing it alone. We have to build up to actually doing the language, okay? And so my approach to this is basically you get the idea of I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And I think this is probably something that a lot of people are familiar with, right? I see Raquelita says they learn by doing, right? That's exactly right. And so Itab also says, yeah, visual learners are good with memorizing images, right? Or mesmerizing images, right? We need to have that visual stimulation for a lot of students. But I think that what we're doing as teachers is we're enabling them to learn, not enabling them to study. Studying is not, that's the reading and the hearing and the listening alone. Learning happens when you're physically engaging. So some of you might recognize this image. It's not a perfect analogy, but this is how I kind of approach learning. If you see here, we have the Karate Kid movie and Mr. Miyagi. What's the Karate Kid doing? Well, he's waxing on and waxing off the car, okay? And here, what is he doing? Well, he's painting a fence, right? And what is he learning, right? What happens in this movie is the Karate Kid says to Mr. Miyagi, you're the teacher. Why aren't you teaching me? That was the deal. You're supposed to teach me. What am I learning? I need to learn martial arts. And Mr. Miyagi, well, he says to him, hey, I'm gonna attack you. I'm gonna punch you. I want you to wax on and wax off. And Karate Kid, he automatically blocks those attacks without even thinking about it. And when he is doing those blocks, Mr. Miyagi gives him feedback. Now you need to do your wrist this way. So he starts by making the Karate Kid do the language before he explains what it actually is, okay, and how to be using it. So I think starting with the physical activity is really important. And I want you to keep this Mr. Miyagi example in mind. I'm going to bring it back into the curriculum here, okay? So building that muscle memory, I think in order to do that properly, it's important to have curriculum that enables you to do that, okay? So let's see how we can apply that Mr. Miyagi theory to a book like Grammar Planet or Grammar Galaxy. And so just the overview very generally, if you see here in this slide, Grammar Planet has 3 books and so does Grammar Galaxy. They span from kind of pre-A1 up through making students ready for B1, just short of B1 into solid A2 territory. So the full elementary spectrum. Grammar Planet, excuse me. Grammar Planet is the first kind of book we're going to look at. It's got 16 units, 4 pages per unit. It's very simple. It's very easy for the students to get into. Most importantly, it's all learner-centered activities. And the learners can actually engage with the grammar that's happening here, okay? So if you remember when I mentioned the linear approach to grammar teaching, going from A to B to C to D just in a straight line, this has been shown that it's not effective in language learning. And so what we have sort of theorized is that the spiral approach, sort of taking this route, is significantly more effective in not only helping students remember, but also helping students to master the language. Now, this means if you're taking a given grammar point, for example, I love using the example of articles. Students always ask me, hey, can you give me some more information about the articles and the? And I tell them, well, yeah, for my adult students, I'll give you a book, but it's 350 pages long explaining all the rules about when to use which one. It's not possible to learn those all at once. The spiral approach says, let's learn one rule about and the, and let's come back later in a future point and add a little bit another rule, and you're building up. You're not running around in circles. You're spiraling upwards, okay? This is hard to plan as a teacher. And so I really like the Grammar Planet and Grammar Galaxy series because the spiral is built into the curriculum itself, okay? What this means is, I'm going to explain this using the slides here. If you look at the first slide, the first square here, the green, we have orange, and we have blue color, okay? In the table of contents, which we saw here, and I'm going to zoom into this so everybody can get a better glance. The green parts here, these are the grammar points that the students are going to be learning newly in Grammar Planet 1. Okay, this is the first book. This is all going to be new material. Then when they finish and they go to Grammar Planet 2, you can see that we have the orange and the green. Anything in orange is new. This is new material, new grammar. But anything in green, that's going to be something that's spiraling back to what they learned in Grammar Planet 1, and it's going to build upon the complexity a little bit more so that they're reviewing and enhancing understanding. And so the reason that I'm emphasizing this so much, I think that Ita mentions this, from my experience, the methodology is more important than the content. I agree that the methodology is important, and I think that choosing curriculum and that arranges the content in a way that enables you to use effective methodology is so important. And we see that here. When we get to Grammar Planet 3, here's the spiral again. We're going to have green going back to Student Book 1, orange going back to Student Book 2, and then back to new stuff is going to be in blue in Student Book 3. So as an example, you can see in the first book, we have articles and nouns, and the, that's it. Then we have a few verb forms, be and pronouns. Later we're going to have in Grammar Planet 2, if you notice the green, we're going to have those points coming back with a little bit added complexity. If you notice, now we have added here, we've added the to the mix. Not just and un, but we're going to add the later on after the students have already kind of mastered a certain aspect. We're going to bring it back. Same thing here. We're going to add the irregulars later. But we're also going to be adding, in these yellow boxes, new material, new things for them to build on. But we're spiraling. We're keeping all of this relevant, okay? You move on to book 3, and again, we're going to start with something that they've seen before. And part of spiraling, part of adding complexity isn't just about adding new things. It might be teaching them how to use 3 things they already know, but at the same time, right? For example, the future form, we talk about 3 future functions, right? And how we use will, be, going to, and be, ing forms. Well, teaching students how to use each one is one thing. Teaching them how to use them together is a spiral complexity we can add in later levels. And so you'll see that the curriculum here, it automatically sort of includes all of this spiral, okay? And I think that this is a major time saver for teachers. You can jump right into this and know that the book series is going to guide you, and you can be ready for the spiral that's going to come out, okay? And so the actual instruction in the book, I guess before we get into that, did anyone have any questions about the spiral, this concept? It looks like from the chat, everybody seems to be following along pretty well. I see some I agrees, some excellent. Seems like there's a lot of people here. Great, I'm glad everyone's on the same page with the spiral. It's one of my favorite parts about this series. So looking at the book itself, the Grammar Planet books, I think what's really great here is if you take a look at this first page, at the very top corner, you're going to have, in every unit, there's going to be a theme for the country. It's all going to be based on a country's flag. You can imagine that this is a family who's traveling around the world. So it gives you just extra content that you can add into your grammar class. And it's also interesting. Students love learning, young learners love learning about these sorts of new things, and it gets them hooked immediately. You'll also notice that we have these simple grammar charts. But before we look at the grammar chart, I want to look at the picture at the bottom of this page, okay? You can see here we have a family. And this family is introduced in the beginning of the book, and it goes through the entire series of Grammar Planet books. You can follow them. The students can recognize these people. They know about them. This is creating context. And grammar outside of context is just sounds and shapes and letters. They don't have meaning. And so I think what's really crucial about this series is you have the context and you can start with the context, okay? You start with, every student understands asking their parents what something is. And in this book, the grammar point is basically demonstratives, right? And yes or no questions. Is that a doll? Are these dolls? Well, we're gonna see that the conversation happening between the family members is something that the students can understand because they know that experience, that context, okay? And that means when we look at these conversations first, the grammar charts are going to mean something to them. You don't have to lecture about the grammar charts because we're already contextualizing what this means, and we can jump right into using it, okay? And let me give you an example of what that means. If you have this context plus this grammar chart, I strongly believe in not lecturing young learners about grammar from the get-go. Lectures can come later, clarification can come later, but I think the Mr. Miyagi style, getting them to physically do something is much more important. And we can do that through, this is an activity that maybe you've done some variation of before, but substitution table hopscotch, okay? I think one way you can do this is basically the objective here is to provide questions to the students based on the context we just saw on the page before, and have the students answer the questions, not necessarily verbally. They're not ready. We just got there. But by jumping to the correct words to complete the sentence and answer the questions, okay? Let me show you what this looks like. As the instructor, you're going to prepare a list of questions that come from the context, right? Is this a doll? Are those ducks? These are the questions that they just saw. And you're going to prepare flashcards with objects, dolls, ducks, a lake, whatever. Could be an airplane we saw on that first page. And here's how it works. You're going to provide questions to the students. You're going to take flashcards that are based on the table we saw. Okay, you're going to make flashcards for each individual word. This is a slightly different table, but on the next slide I'll show you sort of what this would look like for the Grammar Planet Unit 8 that we just saw. You're going to have the students, after you ask them the question with a flashcard, they're going to jump to each part of each element, each component of the answer that they need to provide. And I will say, if you look at step number 4, I recommend don't have the students jump directly on the flashcards. I usually use tape and I make a landing zone. Flashcards are slippery and fragile, and so are students, so give them a space they can jump safely, okay? So let's see what this would look like. You hold up a flashcard with a lake, okay? And you say, is it a lake? And the students, all they have to do, they've already seen the answers to these questions, they know what the grammar table looks like, all they have to do is jump from one point to another. Yes, comma, it or they just have to make one decision here. Is or are, one decision here, period. Is it a lake? Yes, it is. Are these ducks? Yes, they are. Okay? Now, the reason that I love doing this is, number one, they're not feeling the pressure to do language immediately. They're not feeling the pressure to do language by themselves. They're surrounded by their peers, by other students here, right? The students are going to be cheering them on, offering them guidance. I like including things like the commas here, not only to get them used to seeing them, but also it gives them a pause point, right? The student can jump here, and then if they're a little unsure, well, their classmates are going to shout, it, because young learners get excited about achieving things. Students going to jump there and move. So what we're doing is we are doing the Miyagi, right? It's not exactly the same as Mr. Miyagi did, but it gets the students physically involved. It gets them used to the forms, exposed to the forms, and not only that, but most importantly, they're achieving a real world goal. They're making actual accomplishments via language. That makes it feel meaningful. That makes the students feel better, confident. They get a point. They get to the end. Well, they did that through words, right? And they're learning this structure. Yes, it is, without even thinking about it. So that when they have to go to the production stage, they didn't even realize they're learning. That's why I make this distinction between learning and studying. So we're not studying, we're learning here, okay? And then later, you add complexity. You can spiral back when you start to add the no questions, right? Oh, now it's become more complicated, but they're already used to it. They're ready for it. If you add the complexity through the activity, then you don't have to lecture. You don't have to, run the risk of students who don't like grammar getting lost in the grammar. Okay, that's why I love this sort of Miyagi style teaching. You can do this with any kind of structure. Here we have a variety of different pronouns: it, she, he, they. We have the be verb. We have prepositions. We have an article, which we could add another article to it, right? And then we have different nouns. So we can modify this and make it work for basically any kind of style. I see Raquelita Lopez also mentioning that they have had excellent results with this strategy, right? I find that teachers who start with the physical aspect, they get more results. They get students that are more engaged, okay? So after we go through, we see the language and context. We teach it through an embodied activity, right? And then we move on to the next page. This is page 2 in the unit. You have the simple practice with easy to follow activities, okay? There are pictures here that are following the context we learned previously. The pictures are easy for the students to understand so that they can independently work through it. And here is where the scaffolding kind of comes in that I mentioned before. Scaffolding being creating support structures for students to use language in a safe way before they have to use it independently. And activities need to build up support and slowly remove it. Again, John Edwards has a great video on the Compass Publishing YouTube channel where you can see more information about how to do that. But this book sets up the scaffolding in an intuitive way so that students can follow, self-correct, or even correct each other, okay? And that's done through these simple pictures and very intuitive activities that we eventually, on the third page, build up more complexity to. Okay, well now we don't have as many support structures, and now we need to physically start writing. Well, that writing is going to be easy because they've seen this word order before. They've seen it several times. They're ready to apply it a little bit, but they're still supported. They still have enough help there that they're not going to feel sort of like stressing out about making the language happen. Okay, and so coming back, when it's time to review, I'm not going to review necessarily on the board, I'm gonna, use another activity. I'm gonna take another page out of Mr. Miyagi's book. I like to do this team checkup game, okay? This is a great one because you can wrap up a lesson by doing this at the end. You can review a previous grammar point, and you can also check individual understanding all through this sort of team activity. The way this works is you can take the exercises from either the language tracking or from the original context conversations we saw at the beginning. You only need 3 baskets or bowls or whatever, and a ball. And this is what we're going to use to add the physical skill to get them engaged and thinking physically. And it's really simple. You have 2 teams, and they're going to line up, team 1 and team 2. And then you're going to alternate each team, asking them a question with a flashcard in this case, right? Are these ducks? Is this a hat? Are these shoes? And then if the student answers it correctly, which they've been doing on the paper the whole time, they're ready to do it in speaking. If they answer it correctly, they get to throw the ball and potentially score a point. Now, I like to divide the points from the language. Making correct or incorrect language does not actually directly give them points or not. And this makes it feel less punitive, less like a punishment if they make a mistake. It just means, I don't get to play the game. It doesn't mean that my language is bad and I shouldn't get points. It just means I don't get to play the game yet, right? It's one step removed, but I think that makes a difference for helping the students not feel punished, you know? And students want to throw things. I don't know if you have this experience, but young learners like to grab stuff and throw them. So what I do is, you can add points up. It depends on your classroom. What I also do is sometimes I will take the 5-point basket and the 3-point basket and the 1-point basket, and I will change those into like the 5-point basket is a jungle, and the 3-point basket is a desert, and the 1-point basket is a lake. And instead of balls, I'll have stuffed animals. And the students have to also choose the animal that would live there, or maybe they won't choose the right animal, and it becomes really funny. Oh, why is the monkey doll in the lake? And it gives them more vocabulary. It gives you more vocabulary to get them engaged with. It gives them more interest. It motivates. And so gamifying your lectures is a great way to make sure the learners are learning it and not just wasting time studying by reading and hearing, okay? And so after you've done that and the students are comfortable with the forms, then we get to the production part of the book, the last part of the unit. Typically, this is going to be either speaking or writing. At the very top of the page here, you see this part here at the top of the page. These are all set up really well, so that even if it's a writing activity, it can be easily converted into a speaking activity. And what these do are, it gives the students that now almost all of the scaffolding has been removed, and they're ready to start doing the speaking activity. At the bottom of the page, you're going to have review, because spirals should have different layers across the book and across units within the given book. So you get to review. You can turn these into speaking activities very easily as well. There's a wide variety of how they do these production activities. Some of them like this are just looking at a bedroom. Sometimes I will use the classroom as a bedroom, and you can make it messy with flashcards, and they have to find the flashcard, run up to you and say, "Teacher, is this your ball?" And if they do that, then they get a point. Yes, thank you for helping me clean up the bedroom. You have introducing your family activities. You have word searches. Again, this is essentially a game. You have interviews that you can use, and so between the review and the production, it gives them enough information to prepare them to be doing this on their own in the workbook. Okay, and the workbook takes it up a notch. It gives you error correcting activities. It gives you also grammar in reading, and so the students are able to start seeing different context for each language and analyzing it in a finer tuned way. Okay. So I want to sort of move after the students finish 1, 2, and 3 of the Grammar Planet. Then they would get into the Grammar Galaxy. Okay, and so in Grammar Galaxy, it's very similarly structured, and they're going to feel very familiar. 4 pages per unit, learner-centered, simple tables, and you can see that it's structured the same way that we have it structured in Grammar Planet. You have the spiral built into the course content. And I think that's really key. The students are going to be familiar, the teachers are going to be familiar. And then you have a very similar structure. We're just going to up the complexity and the difficulty a little bit. We have characters that they all know. These are new characters. It's a different family, but they're introduced and they start with some context, some conversation. You can still do the activity lectures. We have the simple tables that you can use to structure activities and students can easily follow. We have the intuitive grammar checkup, right? This is where we start by looking at the grammar activities after we've practiced them in activities, just like Grammar Planet. But now the students, they can do the next level of complexity. And we're going to have two sections here for the grammar checkup. And then we're going to move into, if you look at the next part, we're going to move into complex activities that build up. Again, that scaffolding, build up in difficulty, but are still achievable by students. This is where we build confidence. And this is where students can start to feel like they're ready to use the language and they can feel good about it. Because they can feel it's getting difficult, but it's scaffolded and structured in a way that they can achieve it on their own. They can get there, okay? Or they can help each other very easily with that. At the end, so we have our 2 pages, our 3rd page, and our 4th page. Again, we're gonna have a production activity. What I like about Grammar Galaxy is here we're gonna have always a writing activity. Okay, now the students, we can sort of transition after this series of 3 books, we can transition into a writing class. They'll be ready for it. Which you can also turn into a speaking activity, a game using the bedroom, kind of like I mentioned before. But then the Lincoln Review here, where we come back and we spiral within the book, this is always going to be a speaking activity. So we always have some varied production and some varied instruction to help satisfy the needs of those mixed learning style learners. And also help build up different levels of learner, students who are ready for writing and who need a little more help, okay? This book also, in the appendix, has a lot of useful tools. You can find all of the grammar rule charts, but they also have tests built in, so you can easily do a midterm and a final test. So that way you can sort of track the student's progress. I think that using the activities is a great way to see individual progress day to day, but sometimes it's helpful to use these tests to see retention. And then the workbook. We also have a workbook that comes along with this book, and it's structured very similarly. Again, we're just adding complexity. They get a grammar review, they get the chart here for easy reference, and then they're gonna move through the checkup. This is gonna be just like you probably did in class. And then they get these varied different activities that, again, build up the confidence because they're getting harder as they go, but they're still fun, they're still interesting, and they're still achievable by themselves, or maybe with a little bit of parent help, okay? And we do these through fill in the blanks, unscrambles, sentence rewrites, circle the right word. We're getting this multimodality, and that's so important to help with different kinds of learners, okay? Later on, I think, of course, this has error correction as well, but it also brings back the context from the student book, and it puts all of that grammar in a new context, but in a way that's familiar. And I think that's also really important to make sure the students are following along in a meaningful way. So just to kind of round up the Grammar Galaxy and the Grammar Planet, I think that these are really useful because it helps make this grammar learning meaningful. We start with context. We don't start with the grammar chart. We start with context. It enables the instructor, to pair the language with experiential activities, and that is how we get the results that Mr. Miyagi does, right? We get meaningful learning, not studying, but meaningful learning in context. The extra activities are easy to implement because the books sort of allow you to do that. You get multiple teaching and learning methods. You get photos, you get writing, you get fill in the blanks, you get unscrambles, and it's fun. The structure is designed to help students achieve and to help instructors make sure that they do. Okay. Okay, so that's what I have as far as the Grammar Planet and Grammar Galaxy book series goes. We can take a moment if anybody has any questions about these before I move on to introduce a tool called ClassBox that I think is really useful for getting the most out of this curriculum and really maximizing your instructional potential. So did anyone have any questions about either the experiential learning or about the Grammar Galaxy or Grammar Planet? Yeah, I see Itab is also saying, we got to give them an example. That's how we find the obstacles students are facing. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and also having, like Alba says, having the grammar chart review is good because it says this helps students to remember the structure before going into the activities. Yeah, and that's what I mean by having this language that the students and teachers can share. The grammar charts become that middle ground language where it's a visual aid. Maybe they're not reading each word, but it reminds them, oh yeah, I remember we did this. I was jumping from A to B to C to D. I know what this is, and they're ready to get into the activities. Juan's asking, please suggest us more educational tools. Yeah, so actually ClassBox that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. This can really change how you're approaching the classroom and how you're approaching second language learning. Basically, in a nutshell, this is a very easy to use teaching platform. And this is for teachers. This is teacher facing, okay? This is going to enhance your ability to instruct. And it can be used for planning. It can be used in the classroom. It can also be used for remote teaching, which I know a lot of us are still having to do with the current situation. But I'm going to go over how we can use these specifically for Grammar Planet and Grammar Galaxy as well. There's a whole library of digital books that you can find on ClassBox. There's 100 different courses going all the way from kindergarten to adults. And if you sign up for this ClassBox service, which Compass Publishing is offering a 1-month free trial on. So you can, if you get in here, you can access all of their textbooks. There are 1,000+ digital textbooks, all streaming. This includes Grammar Planet and Grammar Galaxy. You can jump in there right now and you can go and look at those activities that I was talking about and the scaffolding and the spiral curriculum that I was mentioning. On top of that, you can search for levels that are curriculum that's more appropriate for what you need by skill or by level. And it also is going to include a lot of things you don't get just from a textbook. You get the audio files. If there's listening activities in a book, then you can get the listening activity directly there in the digitally streamed textbook. There's answer keys built into the digital book and downloadable. You get annotation tools, right? You can highlight, you can circle. This means you could use it on a smart whiteboard, on a projector. You could use it streaming. And there's also all of these downloadable supplementary resources, more than 10,000 of them. And so this is useful for both the teachers and the students. There's lesson plans for the teachers, there are worksheets, activities, and tests, things you can use for the students as well. And so this sort of brings just your standard textbook up to the next level by providing other online and offline tools that you can use, okay? And so if you take a look here, this is sort of what it looks like when you go into the textbooks. You can see that you can organize, you can search via the levels here, A1 through the C2. You can search via level according to like primary school, secondary school, even high levels and adults. You can also take a look, if you look at the individual books, you'll get additional detail here. And when you click on one of these books, these are the streaming books, it opens up. And this is sort of what it looks like. You have the ability to do some of this annotation. And if you're looking for more detail on how this all works, there's a great live demo on the ClassBox, the Compass Publishing YouTube channel. You can go on there and you can see some of the live demos, how this actually functions, okay? So I'm just gonna give you an overview about some of the tools that you can use here. This is an example of the downloadable content that you could have to go along with a given book. I don't know if you can see the text there, but it includes Class Booster, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, MP3s, word lists, transcripts, it has syllabuses, it has answer keys, it has vocab practice, writing worksheets, unit tests, midterm tests, final tests, everything that you need for the physical classroom as well. And so you can even start experimenting with some of this through the free trial on the website. You can download these things right now. You can get on there, you can stream the books and see what it's like. On top of having all of the textbooks available streaming and all the resources, it also has a learning management system built in, an LMS. This gives you the opportunity to manage your classes. You can make individual classes, you can assign homework, and you can view the reports. And this has total integration with something called BIGBOX. And BIGBOX is, this is the student-facing service that helps enhance student learning. So the teachers are using ClassBox to access the textbooks and the supplementary materials, to assign homework, and to manage their classes. Students are then using BIGBOX in order to access this class that you've designed online. You send them a class code, and then after that, the students can receive that class code. They can enter it into their BIGBOX account, which is an application that they can access very easy, very simply on their phones or tablets. And then the teachers can send homework off based on those units, designed for those units, and it appears in their app. When the students get those homework assignments, they're not getting them as homework. They're sent to them to pop up as quests, actually. And so I think, again, we're gamifying even homework, right? Students are going to get this kind of quest on their phone, on their device, knowing, hey, I have to go in, I have to achieve this quest. They know when they have to do it by, and then you're going to automatically, you're going to get the report just like this, okay? So as the students finish, it's going to give you, okay, who finished it, when did they finish it, what their score was. And all of these activities are going to be tied to those textbook units. We go back to Grammar Planet Unit number 8, where we were looking at yes or no questions and demonstratives. Well, you're going to have vocab practice, and you're going to have different activities I'm going to show you some examples of that the students can reinforce on their own and have fun while doing it as well. Not only that, it's not only for individual textbooks or classes. There's also, this is for me one of the most useful tools because I do a lot of program coordination. I do a lot of curriculum coordination for entire departments. And the ClassBox service can also give you recommendations for a comprehensive curriculum that spans across several different subjects and classes, okay? So basically you can get these programs that are based on levels, like the CEFR levels, or you can base it off of sort of grade level. And it looks a little bit like this. When you go into the program section, you can see along the left side here, you can choose the sort of grade level. Here we're looking at an elementary level. And then it's going to make a recommendation, excuse me. It's going to make a recommendation for the main course book. In this case, we have Hangout, which is, again, you can stream all of these books on ClassBox and see, okay, you know, this is going to work out for our program. It's also going to pair that main book with all of these supplemental courses. You can see here, this is where Grammar Planet book number 2 would be matched up according to this grade 2 level. You can see that it's going to recommend a writing book and a reading book, and we're also going to get vocab practice. This can save you a lot of time because you know where to start when you're putting together an entire grade or an entire level's curriculum. Okay. Not only that, but there's also support for teachers via seminars. There's plans right now to set up seminars just like we're having right now, where you can access all of the pre-recorded videos. Right now, you can get a hold of those on the Compass Publishing YouTube channel. Looks like Marwa is asking if these sources are free. Right now, you can go on to the Grammar Galaxy website, and you can sign up for a free trial. Actually, here, if you want to take a look at this, we have this special offer going on. You can get a 1-month free trial of ClassBox. This QR code, if you scan this will take you straight to the website where you can take a look at all these materials and sign up. You can also go to the URL here, ClassBoxEnglish.com. This will be easy to find after the video, the seminar ends today as well. But it's great. Get on there, check out the free trial, get your hands on it. It's really a great resource. And so if you want to take ClassBox and apply it more to the next level, which is the student interaction. I mentioned you can send them homework. Well, that's where BigBox comes in. And this is where the students are going to be able to interact with the material at hand, okay? And so this is really cool because the students can use BigBox to do the class activities that you assign them via something called Class Booster, but they can also do activities on their own because this is an English learning application that customizes content that is personalized specifically to that student and to their interests and their abilities. It also does more of that gamification, those activities that we talked about before. So the content curriculum works very similarly to other streaming services like YouTube. There's over 11,000 different videos and these playbooks, and it's recommended based on the child's age and their interests and the patterns that they're learning, as well as sort of what they have enjoyed as they're going through here. And so basically what you can do is when the students sign up, they choose their age, their gender, and the different interests. And that will sort of it'll populate the library of videos and make it so that they can start watching things. After they watch a video, they're going to be able to give feedback. Okay, either this was too easy or too difficult. They're also going to be able to give feedback on whether they liked it or they didn't like it. So that here in the content curation in the video panel, they're only going to get things that they've enjoyed, and they're going to get things that are appropriately leveled for them. They can also like certain videos so that they can go back and find them later. If you want to see again how this sort of works, there's a live demo on the YouTube channel that shows this kind of in action. After they watch a video that has already been designed for them, then they're going to get an opportunity to use vocabulary from that video. They're going to get these cards, these flashcards that are designed based on the material that they've just viewed. And the students have to say the word into the app using voice recognition technology in order to claim the card. Okay, so they're collecting things. Again, this is more gamification. This is more activities, which builds that motivation and interest. As they collect cards, they can level the cards up. And there's, I think right now, about 3,000 words that have audio and illustrations to help students along with, to help them with their varied learning styles, okay? Later, after they collect all these cards, they can later take them to the quiz show. Again, more gamification where they're asked to compete against AI players, answering questions about cards, vocabulary that they've seen in the videos. They've practiced speaking, and now they're ready to do a little bit of experimentation with them. And upon achieving earning points here, they can use those points to then customize the avatar that they've created for themselves that they use in this BigBox app. So there's direct incentive. Again, language creating real-world results, and that drives motivation for the students. Another thing that I think is great, we talked about context. Sometimes there are language forms that are difficult to create grammar points around that you can contextualize. Well, another part of BigBox is the expression forest. And this is where they can learn phrases where they can then apply repetition and scaffolded learning through repetition and then eventually production of these phrases, all while chasing down what we call the word thief. Okay, so we have real world results. We have this bad guy running around stealing phrases, and as they unscramble and say the phrases through a series of different activities with added complexity, they're able to learn them, they're able to achieve goals, and feel better about their own confidence as well. It also includes reading resources. The Big Box has what's called Reading Oceans, and these are graded ebooks and e-readers. There's nonfiction, there's fiction, there's all kinds of topics, the mostly high interests for students, and across levels, including starting from phonics decodable all the way up to upper intermediate. The really cool thing is it includes embedded audio as well as activities to review vocabulary, similarly with the videos. And you can stream these on tablets, on phones, very, very easily. And then this is the part that I think is really cool. This is where we get to connect the teacher and the student. And Class Booster is what the students will see when you're when you're managing a classroom on ClassBox as the teacher. Then in Big Box, which is for the students, they're gonna get additional activities and practice through here. So it's linked with your ClassBox class, and that means you can assign them activities, which will appear as quests. You can use this for flipped learning. You can use this if you have those students who feel really anxious or stressed about using new language. Assign them the quest before the lesson. Give them the preview. You can also use this, of course, to review. And as they achieve these quests, they're going to get coins. Those are the points they can use to customize their avatar. Again, they're incentivized, they're gaining, and they're achieving through language without realizing that they're studying, right? And that's, again, another kind of Mr. Miyagi method here. These are some of the activities that you can assign as the instructor. It'll be matched with the units that you are learning. We have word match, where we're doing pictures and words. We have scrambled, unscrambling the sentences. We have a quiz, which is kind of a comprehension or a grammar quiz. And then we have a summary, where again, we're building up complexity. We have scaffolded supported learning. We get to something that's more difficult, but contextualized. And so we're creating meaning through games. We're building motivation and interest, and we're acquiring the language in a natural way. And so this is what it looks like. This is what Big Box looks like to the students. They're able to get into each of these different spaces, the videos. They can get into the reading. They can also get into the Class Booster, where they can achieve the quests, the homework quests that you have assigned to them. And so this is sort of how I think that this is one of the best ways that you can really bring up your instruction, whether you're streaming your instruction right now, whether you are doing the classroom work, but you want to either have the digital book in the classroom, or just assigning more connected, enhanced, and meaningful learning to the students to help motivate them through this gamified experience. I think ClassBox for the teacher and Big Box is a really helpful tool for this kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. Coming up right after this is another seminar by John Edwards. It's going to be a fantastic seminar for teachers. He's going to offer some advice. I was just kind of the opener for the big show, so stick around. I hope that this has been helpful. If you have any other questions that you'd like to ask in the last minute or two that we have together, please feel free. I'd like to offer any advice that I can. Looks like Sam's asking, can we get the materials? Yeah, you can get the class book, the Grammar Planet and Grammar Galaxy. That's on ClassBox right now. You can sign up for that free trial, and you can get onto ClassBox immediately and access the full textbook in digital form. And so you can be using this tomorrow in the classroom. You can be using this today on a streaming service. They're all of their textbooks are accessible right now. Here looks like we have some questions. Do they have interactive CDs? All of the interactive materials, I think, are largely everything that you can find here you can find in the ClassBox service. Let's see. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get ready for our next seminar. John Edwards is coming up here. Stick around, don't go anywhere. Thank you again for joining me. Thank you, Jose, Sergio, Javiko, Nadia, thank you so much. James, thank you very much for being here. It's been great to talk with you, and I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.
Check, 1, 2, 3, check, check. Check, 1, 2, 3, check, check. 준비해요.
Compass Publishing.
Hi everybody, welcome back. I hope everybody enjoyed Basil's presentation, and I hope you learned something, got something out of it. My name is John Edwards. I'm going to be the next presenter. I've been working in ELT for about 20 years now, and now I work mostly in content development, but I still do a lot of teaching as well. I'm going to be talking today about speaking, teaching speaking, which is something that a lot of people find challenging. So I hope you get something out of the presentation. I hope maybe if you've been teaching for a while, maybe I'll give you some new ideas or new concepts to try in the classroom. If you're just a beginning teacher, hopefully this will give you a little broad introduction to the concepts that you need to teach speaking. Anyway, my presentation is called Getting Learners Speaking. So if anybody has any questions during the presentation, you can always leave a comment in the window. I have the window right here next to me, so I'll be watching that and I'll hopefully be able to answer your questions as we go along. I'm also going to give a little bit of time at the end of the presentation for questions, so if you don't want to ask during the presentation, just hang on to your question and we'll address it later on. Okay, let's begin. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about why speaking is important and some of the overall challenges to teaching speaking. Then we'll talk a little bit about why pair group and small group work is important and why we need to use it in the classroom. And I'll also give you some tips about how to do that effectively. We'll talk a little bit about your role as a teacher when you're doing speaking work. And then we'll talk about how different kinds of activities and how to conduct them in class. There's different ways that we need to conduct activities depending on whether we're focusing on structures or fluency or then I'll talk about some problems that commonly happen in speaking classes and some possible solutions that you can try. And then we'll go through a little brief introduction to the Hangout Coursebook series, which is our elementary coursebook series from Compass Publishing. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the speaking elements in that series and how to make the most of them. So let's begin. So let's start with the background. So let's think a little bit about how our students will use English. You know, if we can kind of project ourselves into the future and imagine our students, what their lives will be like in 10, 15 years. Of course, most of them are going to use English in everyday situations. When they travel, they're going to have to book hotels, get around in a taxi. They're going to have to also help maybe foreigners on the street. Or sometimes if they're traveling, they're going to have to ask for help. So giving things like giving directions, asking for directions. So these kinds of everyday situations. They're also going to be possibly in learning environments. They might go to university in an English-speaking environment, or they might go to graduate school. And there they're going to have to participate in lectures, participate in seminars, have all kinds of interactions with their classmates, also with their professors and administration. And these days, even small and medium businesses are conducting business on a global scale. Their supply chains are from other countries, and a lot of the interaction between companies in different countries is conducted with English as the main language, what we call the lingua franca, the common language. Also, if our students are working in English-speaking companies, like international companies that are set up in their home country, they'll probably have to do their job interview in English, and they'll probably have to conduct a lot of business affairs in English. So they're going to have to know, English for everyday use, English for, academic environments, and also English for the workplace, business, job interviews, and these kinds of things. So lots of different environments where they're going to have to learn English, use English. So basically, speaking, in all of these cases, speaking is essential. Think about how important speaking is as a skill. Whenever we ask people, do you speak English? We're not asking them, do you read English? We're asking them, do you speak English? So somehow, implicit in that is the assumption that speaking is central to communicative competency. If we're saying that we're competent in English, what we mean is we're competent at communicating, communicating verbally. Some people are saying other uses. Yeah, daily experience. Carolina says job interviews in English. At call centers, Robert says, definitely all of those things. The problem is, even now, even though we're well aware of this, and I think most educators are well aware of the importance of speaking, a lot of ELT focuses on other skills, predominantly learning reading, listening, grammar, and vocabulary. So the focus is not on speaking at all. And the big problem in most learning environments, language learning environments, is that the focus is on test taking. Students are getting ready for tests, for the SATs, or for their getting into university. So the shift is not on, a lot of these tests don't assess speaking, of course, because that's not practical for large-scale tests. So they focus mostly on reading, on vocabulary and grammar, and speaking is kind of de-emphasized. But as we saw, it's very important. It's important for the long run for your students, for their careers. So how can we prepare our students? Unfortunately speaking, because of this reality that it's not a focus, we have to make the most of the speaking time that we have in the classroom. We have to maximize the effectiveness of that. So how can we prepare our students? Basically, we can categorize, two broad categories of things that we're going to be providing for our students. One is instruction. They need to know essential structures, vocabulary, functional expressions like how to hesitate, expressions for buying time in a conversation, asking for clarification, those kinds of things, strategies, and also conventions in speaking, like turn-taking, or when you're giving a lengthier speech, how to organize it, how to use kind of markers in your speech to mark when you're changing topics, when you're summarizing, these kinds of things. So instructing them in those things is important, but also giving them lots of practice, a variety of types of practice also, and building automaticity. Automaticity means how language just kind of flies out of our mouth. We don't have to really plan or think about it. It just happens on its own. This is what we mean by automaticity. Also building fluency, like naturalness and kind of smooth flow of communication. And building personalization, so learning how to make the language your own and applying it to your own ideas and your own experience. And using it authentically, like sounding like a real native speaker, not like somebody who's just parroting expressions from a course book. And we need to give our students lots of feedback on their practice as well. So these are the two broad categories of things that we need to provide our students. I'm going to focus mostly on practice today. A lot of the instructional part is done for you in a good course book series. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's shift a little bit. So we talked about how important speaking is and some of the, broadly what you have to provide for your students and why. Let's talk a little bit about pair and small group work. So a lot of the interaction that happens in the classroom is teacher to student. And the model for that is that, the teacher generally initiates the conversation. They're usually asking a question or they're making a comment. Then there's a response from the student. And then if the student makes a mistake or if the teacher wants to point something out about that interaction, then the teacher offers them feedback. So there's initiation, response, and feedback. But the problem with this is that it's not very authentic in terms of communication. It's very structured. It's always that kind of one-way communication, right? The same kind of pattern. And the teacher is always really in control. They have the advantage in the communication, in the interaction, because they're the more fluent speaker and they're kind of managing the conversation. So this doesn't allow students to develop communication skills of their own and to take the lead in communication. So we really need to use other methods. We need to break away from this kind of teacher-student interaction model and use other methods. But the problem is, for a lot of teachers, pair work feels kind of like this. You can see in the picture, the students are they're having a mutiny in the classroom and they've tied their teacher up and they've taken control. So a lot of teachers feel they have this kind of emotional reaction to pair work and group work that they will risk losing control of their classroom. So why is that? Why do some teachers avoid group and pair work activities? Why? Well, one of the reasons could be that some teachers, some parents, some students have a perception or a prejudice or a bias about group work. They think that the teacher's not really doing their job. It's sort of like wasting time in the classroom if you do pair work. So they see it kind of as a waste of time, and a lot of parents may complain, if you do too much pair work in the classroom, they may say, well, we want the teacher to be interacting with our students, with our children more, because they view that as more beneficial. So there's this kind of bias. Also, some teachers worry about error fossilization. What does that mean? That means that after a student has made an error several times, it becomes like a habit. It becomes what we call fossilized. That means it becomes hardened in their mind, in their speech patterns, and it becomes very hard to overcome it later, to fix that error later. So a lot of teachers worry that pair work and group work, because there's not as much feedback being given, that errors will become entrenched or fossilized. Also, teachers worry that pair work and group work is difficult to control. Students will kind of get off task, they'll do their own thing, they'll be looking at their cell phones or talking to each other in their mother tongue. So teachers worry that they can't sort of manage the classroom. Also, it's noisy. Doing pair work and group work where you have all these students talking, you may get complaints from the next classroom or from other people at your language academy. And another problem with group work and pair work is that it can be difficult to assess. So if you're going to assess the success of a task, it's difficult to know if the students were actually doing what they were supposed to be doing, because you can't be everywhere at once as a teacher. So here's some tips for effective pair and group work. One idea is to use strategic pairing. What does that mean? That means be careful about how you pair students up or how you group students up. You should have, one problem with a lot of pair work is that you have one student who kind of dominates, or if you have students that are at very different levels, both of them may be frustrated in the activity. The stronger one will be trying to communicate with the weaker one, and they can't make themselves understood, and they can't understand what the weaker one is talking about. So strategic pairing is important. Also, keep groups small. The more people you have, it's sort of like a nuclear reactor. The more fuel you add to the reactor, the more likely it is to have a meltdown. So keep the numbers small, and then it'll be easier for the group to manage itself. Keep the procedure very clear and the roles of the students very clear. What that means is usually if activities are a little bit complicated, you can kind of break them down into steps. So say like on the board you can write, step 1, do this. Step 1, I want you to brainstorm and write down some ideas about some topic. Step 2, I want you to have a discussion, talk about the pros and the cons. And step 3, I want you to choose a side and come up with an argument. Something like this, break it up into steps. You can also give each step a time limit. So for 5 minutes, do this. For 3 minutes, do this. For 1 minute, do this. And you can announce the time as it goes by. And each step can also have a goal. So you can say, the clearer you can make the goal, the more specific you can make the goal, the better. You could say, I want you to brainstorm 4 ideas, or I want you to come up with 2 cons and 2 pros for this activity. So if you give it very kind of clear outcomes or clear deliverables, then students are more likely to stay on task. It's also a good idea to have handouts as well. If they have something to fill out and they know that you're going to look at that at the end of the activity, or collect it and assess it, use it in your assessment, then they're more likely to stay on task. You also might want to assign roles. So one student could be the chairperson, for example, that they can kind of manage the communication. Another student could be the note taker. They can write down the ideas of the group. Another student can be on the pro side, on the con side. Also, a lot of students have trouble with pair work and group work because Etab says, like a very organized chart to fill out. Exactly. If you can organize the activity for your students, they're more likely to stay on task. They know what they need to do. A lot of students also, especially weaker students, they struggle with this kind of activity because they just don't know what to say. They don't have the vocabulary or they don't know the structures. So if you give them a little bit of scaffolding, that means maybe writing on the board, write a list of vocabulary, some structures they can use on the board. The weaker students can use that. The stronger students can just ignore it. And the last point is, of course, students need your support while they're doing the activity, both to stay on task and also for language support. You also need to circulate to make some kind of rough assessments of the students. So circulate around the classroom, walk around the classroom, and offer support to students as they're doing the activity. This is not the time for you to take a break during pair work. Let's talk a little bit about teacher roles. So depending on the kind of activities that we're doing in the classroom, we have to think about 2 different instructional approaches. Sometimes we have to have a very teacher-centered approach. That's where we're doing direct instruction, where the teacher is like the formal authority. They have the information. They're the subject expert, and they're providing the model. And they're kind of delivering the information to the students, so it's very one way. Usually this is when the teacher is doing some kind of instruction. But when we shift to practice, when we shift to the practice mode, we need to have a more student-centered approach. What does that mean? That means where We're doing more inquiry-based learning or more cooperative learning. We're putting the students together and we're letting them share information. And the teacher is more a facilitator or a delegator. So we have to have these two modalities or these two approaches in our mind as teachers and adjust our behavior accordingly in the classroom. So if you're a facilitator of learning, if you're taking this more student-centered approach, this is the one that's more unfamiliar to a lot of teachers. So what does this mean? What are you actually doing? Well, first of all, you're creating manageable and interesting tasks or projects for your students to do. So mostly that'll be provided by your course book, but maybe sometimes you want to supplement that with your own tasks. The important keyword is manageable and interesting. So it should relate to their interests. It should be something that they can handle, not too easy, not too difficult. Also, you need to provide a safe and supportive environment and the necessary tools for them as learners. So what does it mean by safe and supportive? Well, definitely you need to allow them to feel like they can make errors without feeling stupid or without feeling like other people are going to mock them or laugh at them. And I think you can kind of frame this as, errors are useful. Errors teach you what you need to learn. They show you what you need to learn. This is a very good kind of way of approaching error correction. Louise says, create a safe zone. Yeah, I think it's very important. We talk about the affective block or affective barrier. That means when students are feeling tense or they're feeling worried or scared, they're not going to communicate, they're not going to learn. So we need to provide this kind of safe environment for students to feel they can take risks with the language, they can be free and creative with the language, and they don't have to worry. Another part of the facilitator, the teacher as facilitator, is giving the right kind of support at the right time. We talked a little bit about scaffolding, offering scaffolding. That's what I mean there. And sometimes you want to erase or take away the scaffolding too. When students are doing like fluency building, when they already know the structures and they're just doing something very simple, they're doing a simple activity to just kind of consolidate their learning, to refresh their learning, then you can just take away the scaffolding and just let them do it on their own. Sort of like when you're teaching somebody to ride a bike, you take off the wheels, the training wheels at the right time so they can learn how to ride the bike by themselves. And the last part of being a facilitator of learning is to give the right kind of guidance and the right kind of feedback for the students. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation. Tiago says, does error correction need to be applied on the spot? I actually have a whole section in my presentation about that, so just hold on to your idea. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So a little bit about conducting activities. Just excuse me for a moment. Too much talking, sorry. So we have to think about the kinds of activities that we're doing. So we can basically break practice activities into three types. One is controlled or drill practice. That's where we have a grammar structure and some vocabulary that's very prescribed. What does that mean? That means it's very limited. We're getting them to do some kind of repetitive, saying the same thing over and over again, just changing one or two words. Javico says, you can do it, John. Thank you. Thanks for the encouragement. So control or drill practice is where we have one set expression that we're just getting the students to go over and over again, maybe changing the structure a little bit each time, changing the vocabulary. So substituting vocabulary each time. So it's very mechanical, and usually it's done with just sort of pair, like a dialogue pair, a question and a response. And communication is not the focus. They're not actually communicating their ideas, their real ideas. They're just drilling the same structure over and over again. So that's drill practice or controlled practice. We also have language-focused practice. That means students are aware of the structure and the vocabulary that they know they're supposed to use, like they're supposed to use present perfect, or they're supposed to use present continuous, but there is some communication going on. They're talking about their own experience or their own ideas, just using that structure. So it's somewhere between controlled practice and a communicative task, but it's still very structured. And the last one is a communicative task. This is where the focus is on communication, on conveying information. And it's as realistic as we can make it in the classroom. It's as realistic as possible. And the structures or the vocabulary that we are expecting students to learn, it's not prescribed. They can use any tools in their toolbox to express their ideas. So these are the three types: controlled practice, language-focused practice, where they're using what they've learned to express their own ideas, and then communicative tasks, where the language is being used much more freely or openly. So let's talk a little bit about controlled practice. So here's an example from Hangout, this in the top right-hand corner of the slide. So you can see here they listen to the structure, and it says it's just a yes/no question with is he or she wearing something? Is he or she wearing glasses? Yes, he is. No, he isn't. And then they have a practice activity where they have pictures where they have to just substitute the words. Is he wearing pajamas? Is she wearing jeans? And they're just asking and answering the question. This is very controlled. The language is exactly predictable. Carmen says, is it important to present the grammar first or let them speak first and then present the grammar? Well, it depends what your learning objective is. If your learning objective is to get them to become familiar with a particular grammar point, then I would say yes, you need to it also, you have to think about whether they know the grammar point or not. I think it's not fair to ask students to do something that they don't have the tools to do. So it depends on what students have already been exposed to and also what the learning objective is for the class. So controlled practice is usually done after an initial dialogue or a text or some grammar explanation. And it's usually done in pairs, and it's very drill-like and repetitive. And the focus is on just exclusively on the new structure and the new vocabulary set. So there's much less risk of errors. They're just doing some small manipulations in the structure. Maybe they're learning how to conjugate verbs. They're learning about using the right pronoun for the right gender, these kinds of things. And so it gives students a chance to kind of just try out some new language. So usually we use this kind of controlled practice when we first introduce a new grammar structure. So first, we can kind of think of this process. First, they're going to listen to a model. You could use a recorded model, like an audio model, or you could use one strong student and demonstrate in front of the class. That's another way. Then they're going to do some repetition with the teacher. They're going to repeat what they heard with the teacher. Then they're going to do some practice, and at the end, you can get some students to present as well. So get 2 or 3 pairs of students to stand up and present one of the questions in the activity. So listen to the model, repeat the model, do the drill practice, and then present the model at the end. So this is the kind of the flow, the process. But the problem is that controlled practice is just not enough. Controlled practice gets them familiar with a particular structure, but it doesn't really help them to develop their communicative competence. The reason is that students need to use the language much more freely. They need to learn to use the language in a context. So in controlled practice, because the structure is very predictable, they know exactly what they're expected to do. But in freer, communication, they have to be able to switch from structure to structure. They have to know what structure to use for what purpose, and they need practice in being able to do that. So they also, this much more communicative type task allows them to personalize the language, to make it their own, to express their own ideas, their own experience through the language, and kind of make a connection with the language. So they can say, you know, I use this particular structure to talk about this idea, and it's much more real connection to the language. They also need to develop communication skills. So in controlled practice, they're never going to be able to do things like ask for clarification or hesitating, buying time in the conversation. They're never going to be able to do that. So by making more communicative tasks, we give them opportunities to learn or to develop those communicative skills. It also better simulates like real life contexts. So the process for a communicative task would be a little bit more complicated than for a controlled or drill practice type of task. So you might have some kind of lead-in where you explain the situation or talk about a picture or watch a short video. You might have some input where you maybe listen to a dialogue, do a reading, watch a video. Then you might have a language focus where you kind of draw out or draw their attention to certain elements within the communication. Then you might want to have some guided planning. What is guided planning? That means instead of just throwing them into the activity, you give them some opportunity to plan out their ideas, to say, well, you know, like if you just throw some topic at them and say, okay, today we're going to talk about pollution, plastic pollution in the ocean. What do you think about that? You know, that's a very overwhelming task, even for upper intermediate or advanced students. That's overwhelming because they need some time to plan their answer, to plan their ideas. Even in their own language, they would need that time. So guided planning allows them to plan out what they want to say. Then you can have, you can run the activity. You can pair them up, put them in their groups and get them to do the activity. Then circulate and maybe take some notes and offer some feedback at the end of the activity. And one thing for communicative tasks is we can repeat those activities. We can do them again. We can put them in new pairs and get them to express their ideas with a new pair. So you might want to do that. You might want to repeat the same cycle. So as you can see, the flow is a little bit different from controlled tasks. One thing we need to be aware of when we're planning our curriculum is that we need to have a wide variety of tasks. The reason is that increases the learner's flexibility. If they're always doing the same kind of tasks, like interviewing their classmates, or they're always doing presentations, the problem is they're going to develop only those language skills, only those communication skills. So we really need to give them a lot of variety in the types of communicative tasks that we offer them. In terms of the genre, that means, is it a presentation? Is it an interview? Is it a debate? Also in terms of the topics, maybe some topics that are about their own personal experience, some topics that are more abstract. Yeah, that's right. Itab says, also they're going to get bored. If there's not enough variety, they'll get bored. Definitely. Also in terms of the types of audience, maybe we want to have them talk to one classmate sometimes. Maybe we want to get them to talk to a small group or a team or maybe the whole class. Or maybe we even want to open it up and get them to talk to people outside of the class, maybe some experts or some people in classes in other countries. And also the aim for communication, we have to vary this as well. Is it about telling a story? Is it about conveying their own ideas or opinions about something? So the aims can be varied as well. So the genre, topics, the audience, and the aims can all be varied for communicative tasks. So here's something to think about as well. Sometimes we want to have interactive tasks. That means where it's more two-way communication. For example, having things like an informal discussion or a conversation. Tiago says, diversifying gets hard when teaching beginners, right? Well, I think we can start with a little bit of variety for beginners and get them familiar with those types of genres or those types of tasks, and then open it up gradually. I think that's the way to approach it. Beginners need more repetition, so that's a good point. We can't have massive variety for beginners. So interaction could be things like having informal conversation or a dialogue with somebody about their own ideas. We could have meetings or discussions about more formal ones, where they're trying to make a decision about something, for example. Or goal-oriented cooperation, where they have to do something together. Things like obtaining goods and services, like doing a role play between a salesperson and a customer. We can have information exchange, where they each have some set of information, but some of it is missing, and they have to ask each other questions to kind of fill out the chart or the information. Or we could get them to do interviews. And also we can have productive types of communicative activities. So interactive and then also productive. So describing experiences. So standing in front of the class or in front of their group and telling a story about something that they've done. Or telling a joke in front of the class. Or making, in debating, for higher level students, in debating, putting their case, so explaining their point of view and giving support for it. Also giving instructions or addressing an audience. So these are just some ideas about how you can vary interactive and productive genres of communicative tasks. So we have, as teachers, we have a lot of different formats of communicative tasks. Sometimes we can have presentations, we can have one-on-one interviews, we can have group discussions or team discussions, we can have pair work or teamwork, we can have role plays. I'm not a big fan of role play myself, but a lot of teachers use it effectively. I think there are some topics that there's no other way to teach them except for doing some kind of role play. Or we can have formal debates. I think even low intermediate students can have debates, maybe about very simple topics. So let's talk a little bit about giving feedback or error correction. So a lot of students might feel something like this little girl when you give them error correction. I think a lot of students are kind of conditioned to have this response to error correction. They feel like it's they've done something wrong, they're being punished, they're being singled out or made to look stupid. So this is something that we really need to fix, because as long as students have this kind of attitude about error correction, they're always going to feel intimidated. They're always going to feel scared about speaking freely. And Carmen says, I love role play. Yeah, every teacher has their own style. I'm not judging. I'm not judging. If you can get your students engaged in it, that's great. But whenever I do role play in the classroom, my students are always rolling their eyes. They've seen it 100 times. So error correction, we have to think about when to do it and also how to do it. How are we going to give feedback and when? One thing to think about is if we do too much error correction, or if we do it in the wrong way, like we single out a student and we say, oh, Fred made this mistake, and this is what he should have said. Then the whole classroom may look at them. We're sort of singling them out, and shy students may get very, they may be very reluctant to speak in the future. So too much or doing it in the wrong way is not good, because it'll lead to reluctance. And too little, not doing enough, will create fossilization, like we talked about before, right? Those errors will become kind of fixed habits in their mind. So we have to do enough and in the right way at the right time. Raquelita Lopez says, how to correct them without hurting them. Yeah, that's hard. I think you can focus on, when you have a particular, let's say like this. One way to do it is, while they're doing a group work activity, circulate and take notes about things that you hear. Then you can write on the board, oh, I heard this. You don't have to say who did it, but you can write it on the board and you can say, you can ask students, what do you think would be better? You can ask them to correct it. So you don't have to mention any names in that, using that method. If you are walking around and you hear something that you want to correct right on the spot, we can talk about when you would want to do that. If you want to correct it right on the spot, do it in a small group. With only 1 or 2 people in front of the student, they're not going to feel as embarrassed. So that's some kind of guidelines. Using the board a lot, not mentioning names, or correcting them in a small group. I think using the board is also good because other students may make the same mistake as well. So tips for giving feedback and error correction. We already talked a little bit about using the board, doing it in small groups so you don't embarrass people. But also, giving feedback isn't only about error correction. Giving feedback can be what students did wrong and also what they did right. You can also say, oh, Jenny was using the present perfect perfectly in this situation, or I heard somebody say this and it was a great sentence. You can kind of make them feel good or positive about what they've done. Avoid interrupting the flow of communication and avoid singling students out like we talked about. Don't single a student out and say, Rodrigo did this. And avoid interrupting the flow of communication. If they're in a communicative activity and there's no problem, they're still understanding each other, you should be very careful about interrupting them. Because what that's going to do is going to make a block for them to communication. We should definitely align our feedback with the pedagogical goals. So we should think about what is the focus of this lesson. As teachers, we're never just getting them to practice. We're always getting them to practice something. So we should think like that's the priority. That should be the priority for error correction. If we're working on present perfect and we hear errors that are related to present perfect, we should always correct those. Because that's the thing that we're working on. If we're building fluency, we can do much less error correction. So when we're focusing on accuracy, some activities are going to focus on accuracy, like we've introduced a new structure, we're doing practice, we're getting maybe more like language-focused practice, we're getting them to repeatedly use that expression or that structure. Then we want to especially focus on that key structure and do error correction for that. But when we're doing more sort of fluency focused activities where they've already learned the structure, we're just getting them to use that to express their ideas, or we're connecting to the topic and we're getting them to express their ideas or talk about their experience, then error correction is going to be less frequent, and we should only focus on correcting errors that interfere with communication. If there's a block in the communication, maybe we want to step in as teachers and help the students. Julio says, yeah, it depends on the class objectives. Exactly, that's exactly the point. So let's talk about some problems and solutions to speaking activities. So the big problem, the main problem for speaking activities is there's little talking in the class. When there's not enough talking in the class, then something is wrong. We have to diagnose what's wrong as a teacher. So it could be that the task or the topic that we've chosen is not interesting. It's not connected to the students' lives. They don't have anything to say about the topic. Or maybe we've given them something that's too challenging. We've asked them to talk about something they have no idea about, or they don't have the language skills about. Or it could be it's very simple and they can express their idea and then they're done. Some students might be shy or scared of making mistakes. Or maybe there's too much teacher talk. Just like today, I'm just rambling and talking. A lot of teachers do that in the classroom. They fill the space, they fill the empty space. And I want to stress to you, as language teachers, we need to become more comfortable with silence, with letting our students, giving them space to take a risk and to make some communication. So a lot of beginning teachers, that's the big mistake that I see with them. They talk too much and the students are just listening to them all the time. Another problem that might be happening in the class is some students are dominating. The stronger students are just talking all the time, and the quiet students, the shyer students, they don't have any chance to talk. So all of these things are problems that we need to find solutions to. So here's some solutions. We've already talked about all of these things, but this is just to sort of summarize. So we need to give them a safe environment to do the activity in, where there's like low pressure, there's lots of help for them, they can feel safe to take risks, and there's a positive view of errors. We need to give them engaging topics and tasks, something that's relevant for their lives, relevant to their way of thinking, and also that's cognitively appropriate. What does that mean? It means that, for younger students, they don't have a lot of knowledge about the larger world, about society and about, difficult science topics. They don't have that knowledge yet. So for asking them to talk about it or comment about it is not cognitively appropriate. Also, we need to use strategic pairing. We talked about that a little bit before. That means pairing students who are, avoid pairing students who are strong with students who are weak. That's going to be frustrating. And also avoid pairing students that are shy with those that are very chatty, because they're also going to get frustrated. Give students some preparation time for communicative activities. We talked about that planning time. So do a topic lead-in to kind of get them interested in the topic, and then give them some input where they can kind of get some ideas. Maybe if they don't have their own ideas, they can have some ideas from the input. And then give them some formal planning activities so they can lay out their own ideas. Give some scaffolding. That means pre-teaching the vocabulary or pre-teaching the structure, and giving them some language support, maybe on the board, so that weaker students can refer to that. And minimizing teacher talk. Give students the spotlight. That means let students do the talking. Give you a very brief overview of the course. So this is our 7-level coursebook series for elementary students. It goes from a starter level all the way up to grade 6. And it focuses on a family. So the story of each unit revolves around this family that moved from Canada to California, and it sort of follows each of the different children. The youngest child in the lower levels, and then moving to the middle child, Brian, in the intermediate levels, and then for grade 5 and 6, for focusing on Alex. So in terms of the leveling, it ranges from pre-A1 in the starter level all the way up to sort of early B1 in the advanced grade level 6. So it includes a student book, a full color workbook, and a very good teacher's guide. There's also a practice app and an excellent interactive whiteboard. I wish I had time to show you that. It has all kinds of extra activities and extra games, animation, all the audio is built in. There's also lots and lots of downloadable resources like word lists, a full assessment pack, worksheets, flashcards, and answer keys as well for both the student book and the workbook. Each book has a welcome unit where they're introduced to some basic language that they'll need for the rest of the level. Then there's 9 main units with 3 review units. And then at the back of the book, there's a song lyrics and chant lyrics and sticker pages as well for the lower levels. The units are built of 2 main structures and 2 sets of 8 vocabulary. Then there's a CLIL reading and phonics in the lower level, plus writing throughout the whole series. So I'll just go through a very brief introduction to one of the units. So here there's a nice big color 2-page spread where they're introduced to the vocabulary. So you can pre-teach all the 8 words, and they can do the controlled, we talked about controlled or drill practice. So the way that we do that is with a song, actually. They're repeating the song lyrics over and over again, and they're doing drill practice. And then we have a substitution table where they can talk about the picture using that simple structure. Then we go through the skills development. So they have listening, reading, and then a speaking activity. And speaking activity is where we do more language-focused development, more language-focused practice. So the language is sort of predictable. They know what they are going to use, what structures and vocabulary they're going to use, but they're using it to talk about their own ideas. In this case, they're decorating a little bear with their own clothes, and they're going to tell their partner how the bear is dressed. Araceli says, why the Movers books does not include phonics. I guess you mean the upper level books. We just decided that the writing tasks, the writing should take up more space. So in terms of the class time, we decided to move more from phonics. We thought they already have a fairly good foundation in phonics, and they needed to focus more on their writing at that level. The lower grades do have a lot of phonics. Then we go through the second structure and the second set of vocabulary, and again the same kind of flow. They're exposed to it in the story, then they do some drill practice, then more communicative practice. Then there's a CLIL reading about the same topic, so they see the same structure and vocabulary, but it's contextualized within a reading, like a subject reading. Then, as I mentioned, there's phonics in the lower levels, and then a writing task. And the way that we did the writing task was they do the planning and the language development in the class with the teacher's help, and then in the workbook, at the back of the workbook, there's a page for them to write out their passage like this. They can draw a picture, the lower levels can draw pictures, and then they can write about they can write their passage as well. Usually for the lower levels, there's some sentence starters or sentence frames for them to give them a little help, but at the higher levels there is not. Then there's a checklist also on the back of that detachable sheet in the back of the workbook. There's a checklist where they can say what they've learned in the unit. So they can kind of detach these and keep them in a portfolio to show their parents. As I mentioned, we also have a very good teacher's guide. So the teacher's guide goes through the language objectives, the vocabulary that they're going to be learning, the core structure, the materials that you need, and then each activity has the approximate time that it's going to take, some guidelines, and some teacher talk as well. Teacher talk and expected answers, and all the answer key and the scripts are all built into the teacher's guide, so it's very, very useful. Just very quickly, I don't have a lot of time, but very quickly, there's a full color workbook, and each 2-page spread of the student book has 1 page in the workbook, and it goes through all the skills. Very quickly. This is just a screen grab from our interactive whiteboard. Like I mentioned, there's additional activities that you can use for, you can display the the interactive whiteboard with your projector or your interactive whiteboard in your classroom, and you can do additional activities. Like in this case, this is a click and drag and drop activity. So if you want some more information about Hangout, you can either scan the QR code with your phone, or you can visit our website at compassbub.com/hangout, and that'll show you, you can see the different levels, you can see samples of them, and you can get all the information you need about Hangout. So maybe I'll just open it up to some questions. If you have any questions about teaching speaking, about communicative activities and how to manage them better, or about Hangout if you have any questions. I guess I've answered all the questions already. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you got something out of the seminar today, and I hope that you apply some of these ideas in your classroom and get your students speaking, and I look forward to seeing you in our next presentation. Thank you.